Welcome to another edition of Big Ideas in App Architecture. Really excited today to be joined by Mattias, the co-founder and CTO of a really interesting company called Doubble. Now, usually I go and I introduce everybody by their first and last name, but you and I talked about how to pronounce your last name. I did not do it well in practice, and I didn't want to butcher it live. So I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself using your full name so that I don't get in trouble. And then let's talk a little bit about kind of your history, how you got into this business, and then obviously really excited to hear about what you're building with Doubble.
Definitely. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, so as Tim said, I'm the co-founder and CTO of Doubble, and my name is Mattias Fjellvang. With a bit more dialect, you would probably say Mattias Fjellvang. But yeah, thanks. Happy to be here.
Great. Yeah. Look, there are plenty of reasons why I embarrass myself on this podcast, either asking dumb questions or saying dumb things, but, horribly mispronouncing people's names is not something I necessarily want to be known for. So really, really glad to have you. As we've started many of these shows, it's always fascinating for me personally, hopefully it is for others, to understand a little bit about you personally, kind of your history, how you got started in technology, how you got started or became kind of the co-founder and CTO of Doubble. So maybe just, for the listeners, a little bit of background on you personally. How did you end up where you are?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I started really early on. I remember at a New Year's Eve, I was with some family friends, and I recall one of the little bit older guys than me, he was showing me a website he made, and I was extremely stunned by this fact that you could write something on your own computer and then it will be accessible everywhere. So I was around 7 when I started trying to figure out how I could do this. I even remember I typed inside the browser bar, and then I thought, oh, whatever I type here, then I'll make a website. But you live and you learn. But I found a hosting provider, and that made it a lot easier to actually build websites. So I started out quite, basic, where it was like what you see is what you get editor, and you could paste scripts in JavaScript you could steal from somewhere, and maybe there were some providers who could build a guest book for you, but you had to embed it as an iframe. That's how it started. And then when I was around 12, I got tired of these ready-made solutions, so I had to figure out how to program myself. So I remember I bought my first programming book when I was around 12. And then I just, I actually remember also in first grade, I took a piece of paper and I would just write HTML on this piece of paper, like how to make a select. You had to make a select and then an option and some options and then close the select.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So that's how it started. But then when I was 13, I founded my first one-man company where I would do sell my website knowledge and programming knowledge.
Wow. Okay.
And I have a lot of brothers. Actually, we are
really.
We're 8 kids from in the whole family, and most of them are guys. 6 of us is guys. And my oldest brother, who's 20 years older than me, he's a lawyer, and he had a lot of connections, and he was he would feed me projects from people he knew. So I had a lot of stuff to do. He also had his own kitesurfing company, so I could build like a CRM system. And I also built my own CMS system. That was like just when WordPress was starting to take off. And I remember seeing WordPress like, no, damn, this idea of having plugins, this was exactly what I wanted to build. I just called it Advanced Website Management. I think I called it AVM. Not so pretty, but very technical. And
So you've been doing this for a long time. I mean, I've heard lots of stories. And it sounds awful lot like something I would do, but writing HTML on paper to get the practice, that's amazing. So you've been at this for a long time. So, this idea of Doubble, I mean, maybe let's start by just kind of explaining what Doubble is, and kind of just all about it. Cause I think it's so fascinating, what you all are trying to do. So maybe let's start there.
Definitely. So um, let's start out. Like many people ask, "Oh, do we really need another dating app?" Because there are hundreds of dating apps, and our answer is definitely yes, we do. With the traditional dating apps, there's many problems. First of all, for the women, there's many people who feel unsafe going out meeting with a stranger they met online, especially for women, but also men, of course. Secondly, it can be very awkward going on a solo date. And third, there's this time opportunity, like where if I have to go out on a solo date, I don't even know if there will be any chemistry, and I will for sure spend an hour, maybe several hours of my night. And if there's no chemistry, and I will just go away feeling like I lost my time, and I have no one to share it with, share the experience with. So this is some of the problems that Double tends to will solve. So first of all, we are not a solo dating app; we are a double dating app, hence the name. Um, so let me just explain real simply how it works. So in many ways, the user interface will look like a traditional dating app in the sense that you see individual people. So for instance, my preference is girls, so I will see girls on my swipe dicks, because you also swipe like you do on, say, Tinder. But the difference is, let's say I match with a girl, then we have a match, but that doesn't provide any feature or any value yet. But then if one of my friends who I have added on the app, because I can add as many friends as I want, just like Facebook, for instance. If one of my friends matches my match friend, then we have a double match. So let's say, Tim, you and I are connected on the app. I know you're happily married, but this is just to illustrate the concept. You and I have added each other.
Just for purposes of discussion. Absolutely.
Right, definitely. So you and I are teammates or friends on the app, and I match with a girl, and then you also match with that girl's friend. Then we are connected inside a group conversation. So then we have a double match. And from here, we will have a group conversation where we can all type, but we'll also have a friend chat where you and I can, put down a strategy, like where should we invite them, or like, oh, they look really sweet. This is an interesting double match, for instance. So that's the bare bone of Double and what we're doing. And just to get back on some of the problems we're then solving is, first of all, we see in Double, we bring a lot of people out on dating apps who've never been using dating apps. We had this so many times from people saying, "Oh, I have never tried a double dating app, but I tried. I never tried a dating app, but I tried a double dating app. I tried Double because it feels so much more safe. It feels so much more fun. It feels like I'm not dating. It feels like more of a social thing where I go out with my friends." And there could still be this case where there's just no chemistry. But Tim, you and I went to this bar to meet with these girls, or we went to do mini golf, whatever. And we quickly figure out there's no chemistry. But hey, at least we're together and we can have a fun time afterwards or during, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly fascinating. You're right. I mean, look, I was thinking about it before joining the call. I think I've been married, well, I don't know, a long, long time. I mean, I met my wife before there were cell phones. Like, I'm like, part of this is so far away from my reality, but it does sound so fascinating because I can certainly empathize with this like idea of, it would be incredibly awkward perhaps, and certainly for women. I mean, I've got 3 daughters, this idea of like just meeting somebody and going on this kind of solo date, so having a friend go with you and have that other person have a friend seems like such a great idea. I mean, have other companies caught on to this? This to me seems like the absolute best way to do this.
Definitely. I mean, I remember that many times. Like, for instance, when I saw Snapchat came out, I was like, that's so simple. Like, of course you need an app like this. Why didn't anybody think of that? Or a messaging app like WhatsApp. Like, you need a way outside of messaging to communicate. But with Double, we see that there have been people trying it before us. Even Tinder have been trying to do something called Tinder Social, I believe it was called. And also a Danish app called Heaps. So people have definitely been trying it before. Actually, there was also I learned there was a UK-based startup called Double, actually, but just with one B. We've been in contact with the founder. He reached out to us a few years ago, So there's many people have been trying it, but nobody have really seen to what do you call solve the puzzle in this, because all of them did it in pretty much the same way. So traditionally, when people have been trying to do double dating apps, they would make it so that if we needed to go on a double date or sign up on this app, you and I, Tim, had to meet up in person. We create a profile together. We had to have like a group photo together, and when we were swiping, we would swipe other groups of people.
Interesting.
And yeah, it sparked many problems because you and I could both be liking the same girl. We saw two girls, but we would both fancy the same girl, and and the chances of getting a double match is also a lot lower because you need like 4 parties to agree on 2 other parties. So this is why we do it differently. We just made it like one-on-one matches, and then we have an algorithm that then combines and look into the data and see where do we have a double match.
I think it's so fascinating. So how long has Double been active?
So more or less 2 years, but the first part of it was like framing down the idea, getting some money, building the product. I joined the company in February, a little bit more than a year ago. And before that, they had launched like a prototype, an MVP built by an agency that had been in the market for like 2 months, maybe like around 2 months, which was a very basic prototype of the app. So Dennis, my co-founder, who actually initially got the idea, he just thought this was a really great idea, and he tried to pitch it to investors, but he was also like really green, like he was still studying, he didn't have any previous startup experience. So first of all, investors were a bit skeptical of that, and secondly, they didn't think people wanted double dating. But he was so convinced, like people wanted this, and everybody in his own age group, which he spoke to, were like, "This is a great idea." So he kept pursuing that, and he's a really stubborn guy in that sense. Like once he sets up to do something, he really goes for it. I have huge respect for him in regards to that. So he ended up like getting some money from friends and family, and also maxed out his own student loan. And then him and some other friends would he got the agency to build it, and he got some friends who also invested in the company to like help promote it. So that's how it started. And then once the prototype was out and they got some initial traction, he set out to find a technical co-founder, and that's where he found me.
So, I mean, I feel like I have so many questions. I mean, there's like 100 different places that go, because I'm just so, I'm so fascinated by the idea, but also kind of the timing. I mean, starting a company a couple years ago, and I've lost track now of kind of time and when kind of COVID peaked and ended, but certainly 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, that was much more of a thing than it is now, I think. Certainly in the States. I mean, what impact, if any, do you think that had on like how you guys got started, or the last couple of years? Did it make it easier to do, harder to do? I'm curious what that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, that's also part of what sparked the idea, because Dennis, he used to live in Odense, which is like the middle island in Denmark, and then he moved to Copenhagen during COVID. And when he got there, he didn't really initially know many people, and that's kind of what sparked the idea for Double, because he would maybe match with girls on Tinder. He if I recall, he didn't really use dating apps before, but he signed up for Tinder. But then he also tried together with his Tinder matches to match their friends. So he would try and say, "Hey, I have a friend. Maybe you have a friend, so we can go out," because COVID was isolating people a lot, and he wanted to go out and socialize. So yeah, it was definitely tough times. But on the other hand, I also believe like once the app got released, it was like post COVID, so we were opening up the society again. But of course, this, and of course with other world, the whole world situation have made, like, say, fundraising a much different topic. So like, we are a company born into the current, you can say, economical crisis. But we're really happy to be that, because it learned us to save every penny we possibly could. And
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly strike me as kind of what you said. I mean, although, financially we're kind of in a tough spot with, all the things that are happening in the world, I would think socially, this is maybe one of the best times ever. I mean, I think people, more so than ever, are kind of desperate for, like meaningful connections, having, not just one-on-one, but having groups of people they can rely on to kind of navigate the world. So it seems to me like the timing is almost perfect. I mean, I know funding is tough, but this seems to be something, or it strike me as something people would really want. And to that end, I mean, how has the company grown in the 2 years? And, don't feel like you have to release usage numbers or anything like that, but I'm just kind of curious, how has it taken off?
Well, it's been going really good, and as you say, yeah, the world needs socializing more than ever, and no matter how much crisis we're in, people always want to date, and they always want to meet new people. So that doesn't affect a company like ours in that sense, at least.
Yeah, it may be the only thing people want to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so well, I mean, I've been doing startups for many years, since I was like I started my first startup in 2013, and I've been doing maybe 6 different startups, and some more successful than others, but all very learningful. Um, but I must say, like, Double is for sure the company I've been worked on that has had the most traction ever, and has like sparked the most joy in me. It feels like I've been waiting 10 years for an opportunity like this. So it's really unique. Um, it's been going really, really well. I mean, we're growing day by day, like week by week. We've been growing steadily around, I think it was 7% week over week since like launch.
Another question is just kind of like the footprint. So, and obviously y'all are in Denmark. Was it originally launched as like, hey, we're gonna focus, kind of locally? Was the plan always to go global? Is it global? I mean, what's kind of how have you all thought about that, and how has the business grown? Are there places in the world that are incredibly popular, places it's not? I'm just curious about kind of the footprint of the app.
Yeah, that's a great question. It will also allow me to speak of some of our valuable learnings we made on this journey. So when I joined the company in February 22, I like, the market, as I said earlier, was way different, and it was actually a lot easier to raise money. So the plan from the get-go was to, as quickly as possible, launch in LA, because that's where many other popular dating apps have launched, but also because it's probably the most competitive city in the world in terms of apps, and especially dating apps. So we thought, hey, if we can launch it in another market, why not try with the most difficult one ever? And then, the rest of the cities will be a less of a struggle. So that's what we set up for. And we were planning a huge like fundraising round, but to support this, because things are just 10 times more expensive in the US, and especially LA. But doing this, and we had really good traction in Denmark, so we thought, hey, that should be easy. But we realized quickly the markets changed a lot, and VCs were holding back their money. And then the VCs we spoke to were like, well, yeah, I mean, we typically don't invest in a Danish company, because to us, we were just a Danish company. But, go prove some traction here, and then we'll invest. But, we only had a little budget for Denmark, and but we actually ended up saying, okay, hey, let's just risk everything, go there, and then prove some traction. But it turned out like we did get like thousands of users on board, but it didn't turn out to be as successful. Like we were probably hoping that it would be a lot easier to launch than it actually was, and especially given our limited budget, it was really difficult to compete on the scene. But it taught us a lot of things. First of all, in Denmark, back then, we had a market share of 25% in our age group, which means everyone in between 18 to 26 uses Double. And if not, they have a friend who does. So everybody knew what Double was. So onboarding Double was easy because everybody understood the concept. But once we launched in LA, once you signed up with your phone number, you were just thrown into the swipe deck. Like there were no invite process to invite your friends. There were no real explainer of how it worked. So number one thing was people didn't understand the concept. They were like, "Is this just like Hinge? Is this Tinder?" So that was one of the things. So product wise, we weren't there either, as well as financially. So we actually ended up going back also to save the money, but go back from the LA launch and rethink, first of all, the product. I spent night and day in LA just reworking the whole front end, rewriting everything, and then also making sure that the sign up flow kind of enforced people to invite friends. So we worked a lot of that. We worked a lot of friend suggestion algorithms, and onboarding flow and whatnot. And then when we went back to Denmark, we had to adapt to the markets as well. So what we did instead was, instead of focusing on an outside in approach, we went from inside out. So we would instead take the neighboring countries. So we actually launched in Sweden as our second market, so to speak. And yeah, I mean, that's a lot cheaper. And we also have like network effects because Denmark and Sweden is quite close. So we would ensure that there were enough profiles not too far away for people to swipe on. And so that was actually our second market. Yeah.
So I know people want us to get into technology, and we will, I promise. But, just something you've mentioned now a few times about the launch in LA. And again, this may be such a dumb question, but, what are the things it was taking to launch in a market? I mean, is it advertising? Did you have to build some kind of local content? I mean, help me understand what the challenges, aside from just recognition. I mean, what is the cost of going into a market with an app like this? That's the part I guess I don't understand, or would like to understand.
So yeah, right. So one thing is that we believe a lot in influencer marketing. So we believe in doing in that strategy, and that has proven to be extremely successful in Denmark. That's actually how we became viral in Denmark. That was because of an organic influencer talking about us. We didn't even pay her. She just organically spoke about the concept. In US, we also tried that, but we also learned quickly that, at least on TikTok, it's impossible to target a video to be in one region. And we had a hyper-local strategy. So we had to go like really in a really dense area, get a lot of users. So we saw that people loved the concept also in US. Like once they understood, they were really happy about it. And we had TikTokers who made videos about it. And we saw a lot of interest from around the US. Like we have thousands of users in the US, but it was impossible to target and say, hey, I only want this TikTok video to be seen in LA, for instance. So we got a problem where we got thousands of users from around the US who signed up. And that was really great, but it wasn't a good product experience for them because they would like swipe a few times and then they would run out.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because if there aren't a lot of people around you, then
Yeah, exactly. So that's why like launching in Sweden or Norway, as we have recently done, is a lot easier because it's if a video goes viral in, let's say, Swedish or Norway, it's a much smaller area than, say, the US, or which can also go to England and all other English speaking countries.
Yeah, but so you really have to work to build a base there, before it can. That makes sense.
Right. But actually, I totally forgot. Another really cool aspect of Double and part of our growth strategy is, and that's a natural one, is that we are a social product. So you have never heard a person, well, at least I haven't, come to me and say, hey, Mattias, you really need to download Tinder. You should download it. It's great. Because that would actually cannibalize my own chances of getting a match. Like maybe my friend would steal my match, right? But it's the inverse on Double. People actually talk about it to their friends. Like, we go organically. So this 7% week over week has been more or less truly organic. Like, we haven't spent marketing money on this. We did some videos, but it's like it's really minimal what we have done. Most of, like, 90%, I can say. Don't hang me up on it, but it's more or less like that. 90% of our growth is purely organical because one friend will recommend it to another. So I heard it so many times, like, oh yeah, I heard about Double. My friend told me to get on, and so that's the true way Double grows, is organically, because on Double, the more friends you have, the higher success you have of getting a double match. So contrary to, like, say, Tinder, the more friends you have on it, the higher the chances of you getting a match is actually slimmer. So yeah.
All right, look, because I mean, I have like every sentence you speak, I have like more questions I want to ask about how this works, but we will stop with the about Double and let's talk about the tech. I mean, I'm really curious about. Now I have certainly a better understanding of kind of why you've built it and what it is, but like, how did you build it? I mean, what frameworks are in use? What's kind of the architecture, and then maybe curious about how this 7% growth or launching in new markets has challenged you from a tech stack perspective.
Right, definitely. Yeah. So quickly overview: we are having the app is made in Flutter.
Okay.
So that's a hybrid framework developed by Google, open source, which allows us to code for both iOS and Android and other platforms as well, but these are our main platforms. So it's something I haven't worked with prior to Double, but the agency before me had coded the MVP in that, so we continued development there, and I have learned it throughout my journey in Double, and I must say it's a pure joy working with. Initially, I was like more of a React guy, so I thought, hey, let's do it.
Yeah, I don't know much about Flutter. I mean, what's it like? What would it be akin to?
Well, so Flutter is basically a framework for Dart, and Dart is a programming language that can be used for both front-end and back-end. It's very much inspired by JavaScript, but it's TypeScript from its birth, so it's very strict in types, which is really nice. And then Flutter is then a framework on top of that, and it's very like component based. So if you're used to, say, React, as I am, it's pretty easy to get into. Yeah, and if essentially it actually compiles your Flutter code into native Kotlin and Swift code. So yeah.
Did you say Kotlin?
Yeah, I might be wrong on that, but I believe that's
no. You're right on that. Well, I'm just curious. Have you developed in Kotlin? Is that? I keep meaning to do it. So I'm a Java guy, and I love the folks at JetBrains, and I know they've been a big proponent of that. I keep meaning to try it, but I haven't. I was just curious if that's something you've played with.
No, in my early days, I started with PHP, and I believe Java and PHP is somewhat similar. But I haven't really coded anything in Java. No, I haven't. But as far as I'm aware, that's the language you write Android apps in.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so Flutter is kind of how you built the app. What else is making Double possible?
Okay, so that's like more or less the front end. So on the back end, we have a framework called Nest.js for which is a TypeScript framework based on Express. Oh, well, you can use it with Express, but we have since moved it to Fastify. And super nice framework to work with as well. I can highly recommend it. Very modular based. Like, if you're used to Angular, you would probably get into it really quickly. And then, of course, database-wise, we are using Cockroach, which is what you say, an engine maybe on top of Postgres, which allows you to like distribute your database, which is also really important for a concept like Double. Usually, it might not be needed to distribute your database, but if you want like really fast read and write times, as well as like comply with GDPR and other privacy laws, you better think of that. And this is something like Cockroach is enabling us to meet quite efficiently. We didn't start off by using like the prototype was actually built in Mongo. So when I joined, it was all Mongo, document based. But given our relational structure and concept, it made sense to.
I'm curious about that because as somebody who works at Cockroach, we people will ask us all the time, can you migrate from Mongo, and sometimes we'll compete against people who are like, hey, we're looking at you and we're looking at Mongo, and I've always felt like if you're looking at us in Mongo, one of us is in the wrong room, like because they're very different, obviously, the document store, NoSQL, and then transactional SQL. Why? I'm just curious, like, do you have a sense of why? Because this has always confused me, why they thought Mongo would it be a solution if in fact it was a relational problem, or is it just one of those? I've always wondered about. Some people just pick technologies because they like the name or they think it's cool, and there's like, but it's not a good fit. Is that the case here, or is there really a document problem? It doesn't sound like there would be, but what do I know?
Yeah, no, you're right. Like this also brings many things I want to talk about. But first of all, many developers also code out of like which tools they're accustomed to be coding, which I totally understand. So that could be one aspect. But of course, there's also been a lot of hype. Like Mongo, it's really cool and it's fast and all these things. But more interestingly, we actually, before we had meetings with Cockroach, we had meetings with Mongo. And because we are having performance issues, even when we were like having a relatively small amount of users, we already faced scaling issues, and we were trying to tackle that. They sold us like their own development hours, which we never really used, but which they still billed us for, even after switching away. Yeah, so and even then, like we had many meetings with their senior architects, like all of them, like many smart people actually. But interestingly enough, they all felt like no, a concept like Doubble can easily be handled on the document-based database. Like, so we actually ended up wasting a lot of time. So it wasn't not only the agency who developed the initial MVP, even the provider, of course, they would recommend themselves, right? But maybe if it was me, I would have said early on in that process, like, hey, you should look into a relational. But nonetheless, here we are.
Did it take a long time for you guys to kind of, I mean, how much reconfiguration or re-architecture, refactoring did it take to make the move?
It took some time. It took some time. I don't know, maybe a few months, but it was definitely worth it. First of all, and I was lucky that we just had Copilot implemented in VS Code back then, and I was so impressed by once I started rewriting. Each method to like say, okay, get this user, for instance. I could just comment it out and then comment above, say, write this with type ORM, which is something we use like to interact with Postgres if you're not writing raw queries. And I was like, that part helped a lot, but it was a lot of work. Like one thing was like rewriting all our services to not call a Mongo database, but call Postgres database. So Copilot made that part easier. Also, having a really tested backend helped a lot. So luckily, the backend developer from the agency wrote a lot of tests. So that was like that really saved thousands of hours. I could say.
So lucky there.
Yeah, so we could rewrite one part of the application to just use Postgres instead of Mongo, run the test, and wait for the green lights to pop up.
Can we talk about Copilot for just a second? Because I think in the last 6 months, I feel like I've gotten so out of touch. I think there's just been so much happening with AI, and Copilot is a GitHub product, correct? And I guess I keep hearing about it, but I haven't spent time enough to look into it. Can you explain to me kind of what it is? Is a code generator, or is it more than that, less than that? I know I sound incredibly ignorant, but it's really, I keep meaning to look into it and haven't.
Well, I mean, even the developers who work with code every day haven't looked into it. Many haven't, but the ones who do, they usually clap very excitedly in their hands. But yeah, so Copilot is based on, I don't know, maybe version 3 of ChatGPT. I think it's version 3. But basically it allows, it try to predicts what you're doing and then come with suggestions. So, and sometimes I'm so impressed by how it even knows like what I'm doing. And other times I know it needs to know, but it saves a lot of time. So it will basically predict code. So let's say you have like, it looks at the code above, like where you're writing, and then you say, you maybe make a new variable called get the average of these two numbers, for instance. You call it average of A and B, and then it just automatically suggests, okay, then to calculate the average, you need to do this. So you just press tab. And since moving to Copilot, I don't open, I don't go on Google and search for my problems that much anymore. I usually just stay in my code editor, and it will just, I could also write a comment, say, hey, I want to do this with these two things. And then I press enter, and I wait like half a second, and boom, there's a suggestion.
That's the part that caught my eye is so you basically create like a method signature, write a comment above the method describing what you want that method to do, and Copilot to essentially populate the method.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But also even sometimes where I just wrote like 5 lines above, and then I'm about to write a new line, and then all of a sudden it just magically knows, oh, I think because he's setting these variables, I think he's about to do this. And then it would just suggest me like the whole code. It's incredible. It saves thousands of hours.
It is a GitHub project, right? I mean, it's part of. Am I right about that, or am I totally wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty. I mean, it's owned by Microsoft, and it's and so if you need to sign up, you go to. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's owned by Microsoft, okay. And if you want to sign up, yeah, and if you want to sign up for it, you need it's under a GitHub domain. Yeah.
Okay.
But GitHub is also owned by Microsoft, right? So
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So, so Cockroach on the back end, you mentioned kind of GDPR, and Cockroach certainly can help with that. How important is that kind of like the always on, always up, kind of resilience? Obviously at Cockroach, that's something we talk a lot about. I'm just curious, and we've talked about this on a few other podcasts. Like, if your back end goes down, what does that mean to y'all? If it's 9:00 in Copenhagen and everybody's looking for a date and the service is down, this isn't a positive experience. I mean, what are your thoughts about resilience? And
well, that's another really cool thing with Cockroach, and something that Mongo also wouldn't have, or any other traditional standalone database provider. But it makes me want to talk about, for instance, first of all, just to answer your question, it's super important. And in Doubble, we know it instantly because we have like a support feature in our app. So if you receive an error, you can press contact support. And we have been trying a few times where something went off. And we know it instantly because our phones will just never stop vibrating. People people become distressed. Like, hey, I cannot write with my messages. Like, hey, yeah, what's my date? Like, people, it's really a huge problem. So that is really important. That's something that's true, like really important for Doubble. And of course, with the distributed fashion Cockroach works, it helps with failover, but also scalability and these things. But I just want to say another really cool thing about resilience and, backup strategy or disaster strategy. So recovery strategy. So just 2 days ago, I was in the office with Ingmar, my other co-founder, and we were preparing for launching in Holland. And so he was working on our staging database, and I just told him, you can just set all languages to Dutch, because we had to test that, and we have some influencers who need to access the beta product. And then after a while, he said, "Oh fuck, I ran this update users set language to Dutch on production on all 100,000 users. And normally I would start sweating and I would probably start shaking a bit. But I was just like with my coffee in hand saying, okay, yeah, let's change that. That's so unique with Postgres. Oh, well, with Cockroach. So why? Time traveling queries. This is super cool. So I just went in, wrote an easy little query saying, select all user languages and user IDs from the user table 2 minutes ago. Save it to a CSV file. And then from there on, we could just run an update, back to the original values where we just say, hey, set the language to this. And then we're done. 5 minutes later. No disaster. Nothing, all good. I mean, oh my God. It's pure joy.
Yeah. I mean, so for those who may not understand the feature, really it's actually a very cool feature. So Cockroach being kind of like a distributed key value store and, kind of an MVC style a database, what you can do is if you use a specific syntax called, as of system time, you can access a consistent view of the database as of, this moment in time ago. So, typically, like you said, 2 minutes or 5 minutes ago. And so it's a wonderful way to do quick fixes like that. It's also, by the way, and I don't know if y'all are using it for this, it's also a great performance hack, because if you're looking up kind of static data, maybe locations, things that aren't going to change very frequently, it allows Cockroach to serve that data from any replica or copy of the data that has it in the cluster, as opposed to what we call the leaseholder. So yeah, it's a kind of an unheralded, amazing feature. And it's interesting that y'all used it that way because, yeah, I mean, whoops, I just ran an update in production, but not a big deal. It can very easily correct that. Awesome stuff. I know we're kind of running up on time, and I feel like with all the podcasts we do, I feel like we could keep talking for hours. I don't know if anyone other than you and I would be listening, but we certainly could. So maybe just to kind of bring it in for a landing, and then maybe we'll schedule you again for a follow-up because I feel like there's so much we could talk about. What's on the horizon for you and for Doubble? You've been at it for 2 years. You tried LA. You're kind of starting to, it sounds like, grow organically a little closer to home. What's on the horizon of the roadmap? Or another way to ask the question is, what are you excited about, for the next 6 to 12 months? Because I think that you guys are obviously killing it out there. What's in the future?
Right. So we have recently launched in Sweden. It's going really great. We're growing day by day still. We have a lot of people using it. I think it was last week, we officially launched all of Norway as well. So that the part is growing as well. And launching into new markets. Like now we have proven we can launch it in another market like Sweden. Now we need to keep launching it in new markets. So getting it out there is something that I'm looking really forward to, especially because the concept is fun. Once you can go into another country with your friend and then match local people there, that effect will be huge as well. So that's one thing. And then we also, we gotta get some butter on our bread as well. So we are planning on, within the next, say, maybe 6 months, introducing premium features. So we'll keep the current features more or less the same for the users, but we'll introduce new features that hopefully people will want to buy. So, proving that Doubble can actually also be a profitable business, which we personally, of course, know it will, because it's not a unique business model like this many dating apps who proven they can make money, but still it's going to be valuable to prove we can do it as well. So launching in new markets and getting our premium version out so we can, make some money on it as well.
Do you think you guys will try to head back to the States in a big way?
Yeah, for sure. We will. I mean, the product today compared to where we were when we launched in in LA is completely incomparable, and we still get signups from the US, and even though we are not active there, so we are definitely gonna. We are looking forward to launching in the US as well. We will, but over the next period, we're just gonna approve it in Scandinavia and the Nordics, and then from there, hopefully raise a new round, and with those money, take it to the US, which is gonna be huge because one of the issues I mentioned, we have a trust issue we are solving with dating. In Denmark and Scandinavia, it's not as huge as it is in, for instance, the US. It's trust with strangers is a much bigger problem over there. So we think like Doubble is more needed than ever in, say, US, for instance.
I couldn't agree more. I think you guys have such an interesting concept that I'd be excited to watch your progress in the States, because I can see it going viral very quickly. So very excited to follow your progress. Well, listen, Mattias, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I certainly enjoyed it. I hope the listeners did as well. You're an interesting guy, very interesting guy, who's built some wonderful things, and Doubble is such a neat idea, as I said. So I know we talked for about 40 minutes. I think we could have gone longer, and maybe we'll have you back for a second time. But this has been super fascinating. Really enjoyed learning about the company, learning about you, learning about the technology. Glad you're using Cockroach. So with that, again, thank you very much for joining us on Big Ideas in App Architecture. Best of luck to you and Doubble.
Thank you, Tim. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for listening.